Reborn, I avoided every meeting with Felix this time around. When he said he wouldn't go home for the holidays, I packed my bags and headed back to the village alone. He rented a place next to Wendy, so I moved out. He decided to stay at the school, so I applied to different universities. In the past life, even our kids advised me to divorce him when we got old. Also that, in 100 years, this pair of star-crossed lovers could be buried together. As I looked at the acceptance letter in my hand, I almost cried. No one knew I was reborn. At the last moment, I changed my college application to another university. Even the teacher was surprised, asking, "Isn't your fiancé staying on at school? Can he wait for you if you go so far to study?" Mentioning Felix made me picture him in his youth, tall and strong. Honestly, everyone thought I was reaching beyond my station with Felix. He was ambitious, good-looking, now an officer at a military school, while I only stood by him because we had a childhood engagement. I laughed brightly and replied, "Teacher, free love is the trend now. Our childhood engagement is outdated and unacceptable." Maybe not expecting me to be so aware, the teacher patted my shoulder with admiration. Leaving school, I walked home through the crowd. In my past life, I didn't even go to college. Because in a few days, Felix and I were to marry, and soon I had a child, stopping my studies altogether. Not long after Felix stayed at school, he went to the army. After that, we were far apart. He rose quickly, moving wherever the job took him, and Wendy with their daughter always followed. I stayed in my small world, serving elders and raising a child, watching as my kid grew, first close to me, then gradually drifting toward Felix. Eventually, it was only after the wedding that I found out my son married Wendy's daughter. I saw it in a picture from an old friend, Felix smiling warmly with Wendy as his son-in-law offered tea. My son urged me more than once to divorce. He said, "Mom, Dad's been miserable his whole life. If it weren't for you, he'd be with my mother-in-law by now. Mom, you're not suited together. Why can't you let go?" Even my daughter-in-law refused to meet me. But what could I do? I was unwilling. Unwilling to have served my in-laws tirelessly as they became bedridden, while he indulged outside. Unwilling that while my son fell ill one night, I ran barefoot 5 kilometers to the doctor, while he was teaching another woman's daughter homework. Unwilling after giving up everything for this family, only to hear. He said. They said. Everyone said. We weren't compatible. Everyone blamed me for not letting go. But I wouldn't. Years of hardship had left lines on my face. Even in death, I was determined to take them down with me. As for whether they would be together after I died, I didn't care anymore. I lacked the energy to care. Finally, I died after my son urged divorce again. After speaking for so long, seeing my silence, he stormed off. He didn't know that just as he left, I had a heart attack. I called for him, but he shut the door without turning back. In that moment, I deeply regretted it. Why had I given birth to him? Why, because of him, had I wasted my entire life? But luckily, I was reborn. Back to the time before marrying Felix. Everything could still change. Returning home, I hid the acceptance letter and started to cook. This 2-bedroom place was one of Felix's workplace accommodations. While waiting for the food to cook, I marked the day to report to the university next month on the calendar with a red pen. I looked forward to the circled number. Soon it would be here. Soon I'd be free. Just as I finished cooking, Felix came home as expected, with Wendy and her child in tow. "Sorry to bother you again, sister-in-law," Wendy said apologetically. Wendy, fair-skinned with an oval face, her red coat adding inexplicable allure. The girl, having come over many times, cheered at the food and quickly served herself. One bowl for her, one for Felix, one for Wendy, but none for me. When I came out from the kitchen, the 3 of them were happily eating like a family. But once they tasted the food, they spit it out immediately. "This is too salty," they exclaimed. I leaned against the kitchen door frame, watching Felix serve them soup which was even saltier. Wendy left in tears. Before she left, she told Felix, "Perhaps your sister-in-law doesn't welcome me. I won't come back." Felix saw her to the door and returned, frowning. I ignored him and cooked again. "Did you do it on purpose?" Felix seemed confused. He explained, "Before her husband died, he asked me to look after them. You're a great cook, and the kid loves your food." Seeing me silent, Felix shook his head as if compromising. "If you dislike it, They won't come to eat anymore. The next day, after Felix left, I packed to visit the village. Though we'd had an arranged engagement, exchanging tokens and birth signs, there were formalities to call it off. While packing, I found the bedding and pillows I had quietly embroidered over the years. I thought about it, grabbed a bag, stuffed the duvet, pillow, and the new shoes I made into it, and headed to the pawn shop at the end of the street. Things I spent years embroidering I sold for $30. Sure, it's not a lot, but college expenses are steep. I can save this money. Back home, I marked a big cross on today's date on the calendar. 20 more days. In 20 days I can leave this place and head for my new life. Felix came back late. The food I cooked was untouched. I ate at school, he casually explained. But the scent of white tea on him told me he had dinner with Wendy and her daughter. He knew eating here would annoy me, so he ate out before coming home. I quietly put away the dishes and went back to my room. The room was filled with my high school books and papers, and many overflowed into the living room. I started tying up the books from my room and planned to tidy up the living room after Felix left tomorrow. Since I'm leaving, it's not right to leave anything behind. As I was packing, I heard a knock on the door. I knew it was Felix. He was always polite, never entering my room without my permission. "What's up?" I didn't want him to see me packing, so I asked. There was a pause outside before he said, "I'm writing the marriage report. How about setting the date for the 9th of next month?" The 9th of next month was the same day we got married in my previous life. I glanced at my packed bags and replied indifferently, "Marriage is a big deal. Let me ask around tomorrow." A long silence followed before I heard him leave. I breathed a sigh of relief and leaned against the headboard. With his current stature, he didn't really need to inform his family about the marriage report. My parents passed away when I was young. Due to our childhood engagement, his family took me in. To everyone else, I've always been part of Felix's family. The marriage report is just a formality. Felix is handsome, has a good job, and treats me well. It's clear as day my heart was set on him from the start. I owe Felix's family, but I spent my last life repaying them. I don't owe them anything anymore. This life I want to live my own path without Felix. The next day I was surprised to find Felix had made breakfast. Fried eggs and 8 treasure porridge, my favorites. In the 3 years since starting school here, he rarely ever did this. I quietly sat down. The only sound was the occasional clink of the spoon. "I'll take a leave and go back with you," Felix suddenly suggested. Startled, I shook my head instinctively. "I'll drive you back." "It's not safe for you to go alone," he frowned, glancing at me. Just as I was about to find an excuse, a little girl ran in from outside. "Dad!" The little girl, with pink butterfly bows in her hair, threw herself into Felix's arms. "Linda, why are you here? Where's your mom?" Felix asked, automatically looking towards the door. Linda carefully peeked at me from Felix's embrace. "Mom said Auntie doesn't like her, so she didn't dare come." I stared quietly at this little girl, who in my past life became my daughter-in-law but whom I never met. Even at 3, she was already a beauty, which is why, despite being 4 years older, my son idolized her and her mom like goddesses. Felix scurried off with Linda in tow because she said Wendy felt unwell. Felix left without a word, hurriedly taking the kid with him. I smirked. Now I didn't have to worry about making up an excuse to return on my own. I took a pen and marked another big cross on today's date on the calendar. 19 more days. I quickly packed up all the books from my room and bundled up all my notes and papers from the living room. After selling everything, I headed back to the village with $13 in hand. Today I aim to call off my engagement with Felix. Although his family treated me well, convincing them to cancel the engagement wasn't hard. I just had to tell them Felix was about to soar high and I wasn't a fit anymore. The village courtyard was quiet and dull. A bonfire was burning, surrounded by mosquitoes. By the earth wall, I used a wooden board to press down the tobacco leaves and slice them finely with a hatchet. Uncle and aunt sat silently on the threshold. After a long pause, they sighed and earnestly tried to persuade me, "Lily, even if he's got someone else, you're the one with an engagement to him. If he dares not to marry you, I'll sort him out. Your parents entrusted you to us before they left." "You." Seeing me silent, they exchanged glances, saying helplessly, "Why are you so stubborn?" I silently followed behind them. They provided the proof, and in front of some older relatives, We exchanged the engagement tokens. I let out a sigh of relief, supporting the elders on our way back. I knew they genuinely cared for me. By right, Felix was considered a catch now, so even his parents couldn't understand why I insisted on breaking off the engagement. But I couldn't say that in my past life, I endured enough hardships only to have my only son born by Wendy and accepted into their family, and I was alone my whole life. The engagement was successfully annulled. They said from now on, I'd be like a daughter to their family. I didn't mention about going elsewhere for studies, but I still ended up staying home with them for half a month. When I was leaving, my parents walked with me to the village entrance. They kept telling me to treat this place like home and make sure to come back and visit. When I got to town to buy the bus ticket, I realized they'd tucked $200 into my pocket. My tears just started streaming down. Back home, the first thing I did was mark 15 big red XS on the calendar. Only 4 days left. Just 4 days. I was about to take my luggage to my room when I heard the door open. Felix was back from work and he had Wendy and Linda with him. "You're back?" Felix seemed a bit surprised to see me. Wendy just gave me a little nod and then turned to go into my room. I frowned as I saw her casually closing my room door, with my stuff scattered all over the living room. I looked at Felix. Felix seemed to pause like he just remembered something. "Oh, Wendy's place flooded from that storm a couple days ago, so she's staying here for a bit. I noticed you were away and your stuff wasn't much, so I just had her stay in your room for now." "So, you thought it was okay to move my stuff without asking and give my room to someone else?" He paused again. Seeing that I didn't say anything, he added, "Oh, just move your stuff to my room. You can stay with me for now," Felix said as he opened his bedroom door. "By the way, where are your books? There's hardly anything left." He placed a small bundle on the bedside table. "Oh well. This is his place after all. What he does doesn't really concern me. I sold them. Don't need them after the college entrance exam anyway." Felix frowned. "Even though the exam is done, you might need them later. Why sell them?" I just pressed my lips together and didn't say anything. Seeing my silence, he asked, "So what did your parents say?" Felix took the bundle of mine from my hands. I hesitated. I asked someone to check the dates, and they said it's not a good time. I'll sort it out later. This was what I had agreed with my uncle and aunt to buy some time. I would break it to him before I left. Felix didn't seem suspicious, just nodded slightly, muttering that we'd need a new date. Then he left the room. He mentioned he would make dinner and told me to rest since I just got back. I saw a marriage report he wrote on the desk by the window. The only thing missing was the date. When I came back to my senses, I was about to go help, but then I heard the three of them talking outside. A deep male voice, a sweet woman's voice, and a child's giggles. I just sat back down. Really, now that I'm no longer engaged to him, staying together isn't right. Especially since we'd be sharing the same room. But with only 4 days left, I can't really find a good place to rent. So I figured I'd just sleep in the living room after dinner. After a day on the road, I wanted to sleep early. But Wendy was full of energy, dancing around the living room in a white dress, doing some stretching too. Linda kept dashing in and out of Felix's room, using his bed as a trampoline. I excused myself to go get water, holding a wash basin as I stepped out. Out the door, I took a deep breath. "Lily, you're back? I thought you went to see your in-laws." My neighbor, Mrs. Hua, across the street called out, bringing a basin with her as we walked to the well. "I was away for a few days, just got back." Mrs. Hua is the next-door neighbor. Her husband is an accountant at the mine, and they live comfortably. She often brings me snacks. We get along. "Oh dear, what are you up to?" Mrs. Hua started to say something but glanced behind me and pulled me aside. At the well, she poked me on the forehead. "Why are you so clueless? Do you know who she is? Flaunting around even after losing a husband, and you bring her home? Don't you know what you have in Felix? He's a gem. You must be out of your mind." Listening to Mrs. Hua's rant, I found out that Felix explained bringing Wendy back as my idea. He told people I felt sorry for her being alone with a kid after the storm, and before heading home, I had him bring them in. I chuckled sarcastically. Felix just didn't want people gossiping, so he used me as a shield. But considering I'll be leaving soon, I didn't want to bother with this mess, so I just smiled. On the way back, Mrs. Hua told me again and again to get rid of such troublemakers. She said if I needed help, just to let her know, even though I knew she was a bit nosy. Back in the house, the living room was empty. I grabbed some clothes for the bathroom but found many unfamiliar women's items there. My usual soap and towels were stuffed in a corner with the trash bin, replaced by other big and small towels and toiletries. Lily, Linda needs to use the bathroom, can you step aside? Someone bumped into me on purpose, and my head hit the door frame. Wendy was already in there with Linda. After Linda was done, Wendy looked at me standing at the door and softly said, "Sister-in-law, could you please move? You're blocking the way." Her voice was gentle, but her smug and scornful look was evident. But unfortunately, I didn't move. "Apologize," I said calmly. Wendy seemed surprised that I was giving attitude, but her daughter Linda wasn't. Not liking me much, Linda suddenly pushed me hard and burst into tears, yelling, "You're bad. You're bad. You bullied my mom. Bad person." Felix heard Linda crying and rushed out of the room. "What's wrong? What's happening?" he asked. He held the child tenderly in his arms while Wendy, with tears in her eyes, said, "It's my fault." Linda needed to go to the bathroom urgently, but her aunt was already in there, so I asked her to let Linda in quickly, and then this happened. Felix gave me a disapproving look. He didn't say anything in front of Wendy but softly comforted Linda, "Don't cry, don't cry. Later on, Goddad will talk to the auntie and she'll apologize to Linda, okay?" As the child continued to wail, he took Linda back inside, promising candy to calm her down. Wendy glanced at me with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, and then followed Felix inside. As the child's heartbreaking cries gradually quieted down, I finished my shower with a blank expression and packed my things in the bathroom sink. When I returned to the room, Wendy had already left with the child. A box of colorful candy was sitting on the bedside table, obviously meant for a kid. Felix paused in his packing as I entered and gestured for me to sit. Seeing his expression, I knew he wanted to have a serious talk about taking care of kids, asking me to apologize and stuff like that. I sat down obediently, took a tissue, wiped the wound on my forehead, and handed the paper to him. The red stain on the tissue was starkly visible. Felix swallowed his words, his expression souring as it flickered between shades of green and white. That night, I slept in the living room. I grabbed my bedding and opened the door. "Wait," Felix pulled me back. "You can sleep inside, why go out?" he asked. Assuming I was angry about earlier, he sighed and pulled me back in, saying, "Linda is still a child and Wendy didn't mean any harm. You're an adult. Don't fuss with a kid. I know you don't like Wendy, but she's having a rough time too. Don't be petty, okay?" I scoffed, "So you brought them in saying it was my idea?" Felix froze, mouth open, unable to respond. I chuckled. "See, no matter how noble your words sound, you can't lie to yourself about your true intentions and restlessness inside." Out of respect for the elders, I was reluctant to ruin his career. But that's about all I could do. Felix ended up making a bed on the floor in the living room. The next morning, I woke up early and packed all my things, planning to find a hotel before coming back for my luggage. As soon as I opened the door, I saw Felix had already prepared breakfast. Linda glared at me, pulling the breakfast closer to herself and Wendy. Felix brought out a plate of fried eggs, smiled at me and said, "You're up? Come over, I made some eggs." Then, noticing the shifted items by Linda and Wendy, he awkwardly smiled, "Linda, can you share with Auntie?" I ignored them and left the house. The nearest hotel was just across the street. I booked the cheapest room available, $7 a night for 3 nights. After paying, I bought some buns and egg rolls from a nearby breakfast shop. On returning, I found my packed belongings scattered everywhere, with my admission letter torn open and Linda using it to fold paper airplanes. My head buzzed and I yelled, "What are you doing?" I snatched the letter back. Linda, startled, fell from the table. Her cries brought Wendy rushing from another room. "What are you doing? Why are you bullying Linda?" Wendy shouted, pushing me and cradling the child with care. Furious, I shook all over, carefully unfolding the letter. "I'm bullying her? Have you seen what she did? Who gave you the right to touch my stuff? Get out." Wendy stood up with the child, glaring coldly, "Ha, you're not even married to Felix yet. You don't call the shots here." She walked to the door with the child but paused and turned back. "Even if you were married, you couldn't beat me." The door slammed shut. Wendy's hostility was always present when Felix wasn't around. I used to feel inferior, timid. She was beautiful and successful. a star in her performing arts troupe. I always thought I couldn't compare. But having a second chance has brought me peace. Why should I compete with her? In Felix's heart, Wendy is naturally more important. But is Felix all there is to my life? I can still attend college and contribute to my country, expand my horizons. The mire here would only hold me back. I packed everything, emphatically marking another big X on the calendar. I hoisted my bags and headed to the booked hotel. When I came back, I didn't intend to make a scene at Wendy's workplace. She ruined my previous life, but would causing trouble ease my heart? Would it change anything? As long as Felix is around, even if Wendy lost her job, he could still support her. For Wendy, it's no big deal, really. As long as I still value what the elders did for me. As long as I don't intend to completely wreck Felix's life, Wendy stands undefeated. Then again, it's also my man's issue not keeping his mind straight. Wendy's husband had so many comrades. Why weren't any of them Linda's godfather? So yeah, at the hotel, I tidied up a bit and sat down to write a letter to Felix. Aside from his absence post-marriage, apart from his entanglements with Wendy throughout life, let's just talk about the 3 years I spent attending high school here. He did take care of my food and sometimes even helped with homework. Based on all that, I should really clear things up about him and me. In the letter, I wrote that I had gone back to break off the engagement. I also mentioned that I had gotten into another college. From then on, he and I went our separate ways, never to meet again. Halfway through writing the letter, I heard a knock on the door. I thought it was the hotel staff, but when I opened it, there was Felix standing outside. He looked tired, like he had been on the move for a while. Seeing me, he exhaled deeply, relieved. Finally found you. Glad you're okay, just glad you're okay. I stayed silent, expecting him to start blaming me again. All right, enough of this. Come back with me, Felix said as he pushed his way in and started packing my stuff. Quickly, I covered the letter with a notebook. But his attention went right to a silver bracelet on my bag, and he picked it up, visibly surprised. How did this bracelet end up here? I froze, regretting not putting it away properly. This afternoon, Linda was messing with my stuff and a bell fell off, so I fixed it, I replied. The bracelet was something given when I was engaged as a child, which I had taken back last time. Felix's expression turned odd. I mean, wasn't it supposed to be at my mom's place? I was racking my brain trying to figure out what to say when he suddenly laughed. I get it. My mom must have asked you to bring it to me, right? He put the bracelet back into the bag. Keep it for now. We're getting married soon anyway, so what's mine is yours. You might as well hold on to it all. I breathed a sigh of relief but kept my hand pressed against the bag. Felix frowned. What? Still mad? Linda was wrong, but she's just a kid. Stop making such a fuss. Do you know how worried Wendy was when you left? She went out looking for you at night, scraped her knee, and is laying at home now. I don't get it. Linda's always well behaved. Why do you always clash with her when you come back? Felix was about to say more, but seeing my detached gaze, he trailed off. I suddenly smiled. You know, this afternoon your daughter rummaged through my bag. I told her to get out, but Wendy said I didn't have the right to tell her that. She also said, even if I marry you, I can't outdo her. I watched as the color drained from his face. What do you mean, my daughter? She's just a goddaughter. Ignoring him, I continued, you always use the excuse of taking care of a brother's widow to get close to her. But if your brother knew this is how you took care of his wife, do you think he'd rest easy in his grave? I laughed sarcastically, tearing through Felix's self-deception with bitter truth. His face lost all color, and he even seemed to wobble on his feet. After a long pause, he finally spoke, struggling. If you're not coming back, then you'd better stay to reflect on this. I'll come for you in a few days. Felix awkwardly turned and fled. I never meant to let you down. I'll file the marriage report when I get back. Listening to his stumbling footsteps fade, I closed the door without emotion. What a joke. As if, in his eyes, him being willing to file the marriage report and marry me was some grand favor. Like I should be overwhelmingly grateful. The next day, I went to my teacher to get my train ticket. She worried I wouldn't be able to buy a seat, so she went out of her way to get me one. She also reached out to people she knew in the Northwest, asking them to look after me a bit. I had lunch with her, and later in the afternoon, I bought some local specialties to take to my college roommates. On the last night, I went to bed early. I thought I'd be restless, melancholic, and overthinking, but surprisingly, once I lay down, I quickly fell asleep. The next morning, I handed my letter to the hotel front desk, checked out, and headed to the train station with my luggage. The train ride took 2 days. It was bumpy, so I just dozed off sporadically. When I finally arrived at school, I let out a huge breath. I registered, and then it was time to hit the books hard. In my last life, I never got the chance to go to college, so this time, I'm making the most of it. Outside of meals and sleep, I spent all my time in class or at the library. I got Felix's first letter 3 months into the semester. I wasn't surprised he found out where I was. A month before, I received a note from my teacher, saying Felix had paid her a visit and learned I'd enrolled in a new school. So when I got his letter, it didn't catch me off guard at all. In his letter, Felix wrote that he wouldn't agree to call off the engagement. He said in his heart I had always been his wife. He also claimed there was nothing between him and Wendy. Knowing I don't like her, he mentioned he'd sent Wendy away and promised they wouldn't meet again. He said he'd wait for me to come back. Along with the letter was $100. I put the letter away without responding, and I didn't touch the money. College was tough, and I was thinking of getting a part-time job. Even though I was getting top grades and earning scholarships, the monthly expenses were still suffocating me a bit. My teacher found out about my plan and gave me a good talking to. Plus, she started sending me $50 each month. In her letter, she clearly said it was a loan. At the end, she cheekily added, "Don't worry, your teacher's wife knows about this and she's very supportive." For some reason, tears just started streaming down my face. In my past life, no matter how tough it was, how much I lost it, how much I hated or regretted, I never cried. And I told myself this lifetime would be no different. But at that moment, it was like a dam burst and I cried my heart out. Even my roommates were shocked and came over to comfort me. After I cried it out, I started to work even harder. Felix sent a letter every month along with $100. In the last month of the semester, he said I definitely wouldn't want to go back. But he told me to wait for him. He would come and spend the new year with me. Felix didn't show. The letters stopped too. Later, I found out from the teacher that Felix married Wendy. The teacher's letter said it caused quite a stir. Apparently, he had already applied for a transfer to where you are. But someone accused him of having inappropriate relationships. Since you had left and they couldn't find the victim, the matter was brushed under the rug. That woman lost her job, so he had no choice but to marry her. The teacher told me sincerely, "Right now, I'm really happy for you. You're lucky. And I know that in this life, I'm lucky. Lucky to have been reborn before making my college decisions. Lucky to have avoided the mess of my past life." I got another letter from Felix a year later. The first thing he said was sorry. Then he said the person who reported him was actually Wendy herself. She knew Felix applied for a transfer. Wendy begged him to stay, and he refused. So Wendy took a risky move. She won the bet and married Felix. Felix said he later realized what the dates marked on the calendar in the living room meant. He always thought it was the day I was looking forward to marrying him. I smiled and burned all the letters. As for the money Felix sent, I forwarded all of it to the teacher to pass along. 2 years later, I wasn't even graduated yet and was working on building projects. Felix's epilogue. After hearing what Lily said at the hotel that day, I was extremely shocked and angry. When I got home, I locked myself away for 3 whole days. I realized that somewhere along the way I messed up. While waiting for Lily to grow up, I let my heart wander a bit. In helping Wendy time and again, my heart drifted. Wendy's understanding and Linda's cheerful demeanor made me forget that I was already engaged, leading to shameful acts. After 3 days of thinking, I knew clearly I couldn't live without Lily. I went looking for her at the hotel, but it was too late. She was gone, left me behind. I asked a lot of people, but no one knew where she went. Finally, her teacher told me she moved way out. My world collapsed. She left behind a silver bracelet that should have never been in her bag. I rushed home, but when I got there, I was told she had called off the engagement. Heartbroken, I returned to the apartment we lived in for 3 years. That night, I got drunk. Wendy sneaked in. After that, she saw my transfer request and made a fuss. Then she lost her job. Her family came and caused trouble, so I had no choice but to marry her. But friends slowly distanced themselves from me. I wrote to Lily. She never replied. It's like when she left, she vanished from my world. After marrying Wendy, she kept a close watch and would argue at the drop of a hat. My parents didn't like her, always comparing her to Lily. Wendy became frantic, neurotic even. Several times I had chances to transfer, but each time was wrecked by Wendy's commotion. She always accused, implying I wanted to leave her for my former fiancé. Each time I could only smile bitterly inside. Now Lily probably finds the very thought of seeing me repulsive. Under Wendy's tight hold, I'm probably nothing in Lily's eyes. Later on, I watched friends rise in rank while I stood still. Wendy started saying I lacked ambition. She wanted another kid, but it never happened. So we only had Linda. Linda grew up, married, and had kids but didn't marry well. Her husband was abusive, a cheater, and a gambler. Wendy cried daily over Linda's troubles. When Linda wanted a divorce, Wendy stubbornly refused. Every time Linda argued, Wendy took her anger out on me, saying she blamed me for her bad marriage. Linda also blamed me, saying if only I had a high position to back her up. I was at a loss for words. When Linda tried and failed to get a divorce, then ran away only to be caught and badly beaten by her husband. I was too old to help her. Linda ended up taking her own life. She left behind a 6-year-old child. I never expected in my old age to lose a daughter and to end up raising a 6-year-old grandchild. Looking at Linda's child, I slowly remembered those days. Back then there was a young figure beside me, full of love for me. I often wonder if, had I not gotten involved with Wendy, if I married Lily, would things have been different? But when did I lose her? I can't even remember. Thinking back on my life, it just feels utterly pointless. The end.